What's it take to reinvent animation with a groundbreaking project like the Spider-Verse series? You're about to learn a lot from story artist, producer, and director Peter Ramsey, who has worked on amazing films like Fight Club, Independence Day, Dracula, Men in Black, Rise of the Guardians, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse, and the upcoming Beyond the Spider-Verse. Peter also produced the Kisasimoto anthology on Disney+. He directed the amazing Lost Ollie miniseries and episodes of The Mandalorian and Ahsoka. Today, he discusses AI's role in the industry, the differences between producing and directing, the challenges of making a groundbreaking film like Spider-Verse, advocating for diversity in creative teams, and so much more. Hi, I'm screenwriter Pietro Schito, and welcome to another Schoolism interview, hosted by the great Bobby Chiu and presented by Write for Animation, my YouTube channel that makes you a better storyteller. Before we get to Peter, here's a preview of one of the many amazing courses you can access by subscribing to Schoolism. I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, my name is Wouter Tulp, and I'd like to welcome you to my digital painting workout course. Just like athletes, an artist needs to work out to keep up their skills, and that is what I created this 9-week daily exercises for. We'll paint from reference, and every day we'll do an exercise of about 30 minutes. A painting consists of different components such as value, color, edges, texture, design, and so on. Every week, we'll focus on one of these components of painting and do exercises. The course is called Digital Painting because I paint all the examples in Photoshop. At the same time, I try to focus mostly on principles rather than specific Photoshop techniques. So if you want to do the exercises using traditional media, that's just fine. The course lets you both acquire new knowledge and repeat the painting process so it becomes second nature. At the beginning of the course, I focus on many subjects, from landscape to still life to portraits, and as we progress, we'll focus more and more on portraits. With the limited time of about 30 minutes, it's a manageable subject and offers endless possibilities in our painting approach. The course lasts a total of 9 weeks, and we'll do exercises every day, which means that by the end of this course, you will have painted 63 paintings. The brushes I use are standard Photoshop brushes, and they're also available to download. You can also use brushes that are more or less similar. You can paint along with me and use the same reference, but if you want, you can also do the exercises using your own reference. I hope this introduction got you just as excited as I am. So let's do some painting workout.
So without further ado, let's welcome our wonderful guest, Mr. Peter Ramsey. Hi, Peter. How's it going?
Hey, Bobby. How are you, man? And hey,
Great.
everybody. Hey, everybody listening out there in online land.
Fantastic. Yeah. All right. So, Peter, like I said, one of the big topics for I don't know how many months now has been AI.
Yeah.
Right. And the future of what the industry that we're in.
Mm.
I would love to know kind of like your thoughts about it.
Yeah. You know, it's one of those things like so many things, it's a tool. Tools can be very valuable depending on how they're used and when they're used. But the danger obviously is when the tool becomes a substitute for actual knowledge or innovation or invention or inspiration. And in the case of AI, obviously, it's like, since there is like an artificial version of intelligence or creativity involved, the lines become really blurry and it becomes really dangerous and can trick a lot of people into thinking that it's doing more than it's actually doing. So I'd say, thinking about, it's funny, it just makes me think of Spider-Verse and a lot of the conversations we would have about wanting to make something that felt like it was made by people and not computers. And so much of our thinking about that movie and the way it was going to look and the way it was going to feel had to do with sort of taking the power away from computers or programs, or relying on things that were pre-programmed, and introducing the element of humanity and warmth and creativity, mistakes and all, back into the mix. So I have similar feelings about AI. I've noticed, if you wind back the clock, 6-7 months ago, I saw my timelines and whatever social media you want to talk about were kind of littered with people like, oh, look at this AI image, and look at this, and look at that, and blah blah blah. And I've noticed over the past several months that's like been declining. Feels like some of the excitement has kind of worn off. A lot of the images are starting to look repetitive, and a lot of things are looking similar. And I think people have kind of, like, at least for now, gotten to a little bit of a plateau when it comes to excitement about AI. I think a lot of people are realizing, oh, there actually are some limits to these things, and the limits are kind of defined by where actual surprise and inspiration stops. AI can, so far, it can only regurgitate or kind of imitate what's already out there. It can't do it on its own. So that gives me hope that people still want things that people actually make. We'll see. But I mean, I think there are a lot of cool applications for it. We just can't let the cart get in front of the horse, I guess.
Well, I know in the newest Spider-Verse, you were executive producing it, but I'm not sure if you had any involvement in any of the discussions, because Across the Spider-Verse is the first thing that I heard about that everybody praised how it was using AI in more like an ethical way.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was a version of AI on the first movie, but it's back then, we kind of called it machine learning. That was kind of the term that got thrown around. It was a form of AI, and that was basically the software we used to create the ink lines on the characters' faces. It was training an AI to be able to replicate those lines, without an artist having to draw them on every single frame. So it was a very sort of like simple. I mean, I wouldn't know the first thing about doing it, but I'm sitting here calling it simple. But it was a simple application for a really mechanical task, really. So it wasn't really it wasn't asking for character designs or really to generate imagery on like really in an in-depth way. It really was one task. It's like, what? We had some artists design these lines the way they'd like them to be on characters' faces. AI, could you like do that on all these frames? And that was kind of it.
Now, something that even I'm not totally sure of, and I've had credits as an executive producer, but what is an executive producer? Because it seems like there's many different ways to, yeah.
There are. It really varies. And I think it depends on whatever it is you kind of bring to the table. It's whatever specific field of expertise or whatever you can fool anybody into thinking that you know something about. But in my case on the Spider-Verse movies, it really is just creative, sort of another creative ear. I mean, having been on the genesis of the first one, there was obviously a lot of endless discussions and debates and thinking about what goes into what went into making that first movie work and what it was. And Phil and Chris, they like having They like having people around to continue the creative discussion. You know, that's really what it is. And just a sort of, you know, I guess whatever trust I earned from them being on the first movie, you know, they wanted to just carry it on over. So honestly, it's as far as my role on the second or whatever other movies, it's literally, hey, whatever's needed, you know, whatever those guys needed, if it's reading script drafts, looking at designs, whatever it is, all that stuff is kind of part of the job, and then offering whatever creative feedback that I have.
Almost like an advisor.
Yeah, pretty much. But I mean, it's like I said, I think it's a pretty elastic definition. So if there were other tasks or whatever it was, you know, if they were like, Peter, could you come in and like, you know, I don't know, storyboard of one scene or this or that, I'd be sure. Yeah. Sometimes it's just getting fresh eyes on something, you know, and that's kind of more or less what it is.
Now, something that I learned very quickly in this industry, maybe I'm wrong, but that there's no perfect job. You know, it's like with every job, there's really good parts and then not so good parts.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like life, right?
Yeah. You get your slice and it comes with a little bit of bad as well as good. Man. So when you think about producing versus directing, what are kind of like the things that you like about it and things that you miss about directing, perhaps?
Well, I mean, the fun thing about producing, and again, you know, I got to stress the kind of producing that I've been doing up to this point. It's got nothing to do really with scheduling or finance or any of that stuff, any of that boring stuff. I'm sort of like strictly kind of creative producing right now, and that's kind of a blast. It lets you look at the process from a slightly wider angle. You know, it's a more comprehensive view of how everything works on a movie, from putting the team together. You know, who's going to be good for this, who's going to be good for that, who's going to work well together. You know, what are these strengths and those strengths, to the overall look and feel of the project, to you know, working with writers, you know, other writers or directors. I'm really enjoying that because it's kind of it's a creative conversation. You know, it's learning what other people bring to the table, and then how you can help them to bring that to the table as effectively as they can, you know. And for example, I'm executive producer right now on a project, really great movie at Netflix animation called The Prince of Port-au-Prince. Our director, Kibwe Tavares, is super talented. And so, you know, in the role I have here, it's so much of that is about, you know, how do you make it possible for him to really tell the story the way he sees it? You know, when a director has a take on a story, or a writer for that matter, and you see the value in it and you see the strength of it. It's just about helping them to realize that as much as possible. And sometimes that means, you know, pushing back against the studio wish or demand. It doesn't happen that often, but, you know, sometimes it does. Or sometimes it's just helping them see things that they may have missed. Sometimes it's drawing on your own experience on other movies. You know, it always helps when you can go, well, back on Spider-Verse, we did this, you know, and kind of like pull up some pearls of wisdom. So a lot, yeah. So that stuff about producing is really enjoyable and really great.
Now, Kibwe, I believe this is his first animated thing, right? Like he was in live action before this.
Yeah, you know, he did a few animated pieces. He's from the UK, from Britain. So he did a few animated pieces there, and he did a couple of hybrid films that are fantastic. One called Jonah, which is like unbelievable.
So were you able to bestow any kind of jewels of wisdom for
Oh,
him?
I mean, he hasn't needed too many from me. I mean, he's that guy. He such a great storyteller and craftsman in his own right. So, but yeah, there've been things about, the it's a different animal working for years and years on end on an animated feature. It's, it's a multi-year process. I think getting used to the idea that um the iterative nature of it, and learning the flow of, like, working with a story team and working toward a screening, and that whole mindset is such a it's a very different thing than what it is to do a live action feature film. So I think there's things about that you have to kind of settle into and accept, and but it's still, a storyteller is a storyteller at the end of the day. A movie is still a movie. So I think anyone who's good at doing it in one format doesn't have too much trouble adapting to doing it in another, as long as you remember, the end goal, or what the final product is supposed to be, which is a good, engrossing cinematic story. And in Kibwe's case, he's like taken to it, like, being able to use the way you can use this process as a tool toward, like, really evolving a story, has been really, really, really a great thing to watch.
A lot of times opportunities come when we're not prepared for it, and it forces us to be prepared for it. Was that the kind of situation, if you remember back then?
A little bit. I mean, I felt pretty prepared. I'd worked on a decent number of movies, and I'd been rehearsing in my head quite a bit to, I'd shot a little bit of film, but nothing on an actual feature film, not on a studio feature film. So this was like a big deal for me.
That's awesome. And we're talking about Tupac. When was the first time that you truly understood the phrase, "I feel seen"?
Wow. Interesting. I think for me, wow, interesting. I mean, in a way, Boys of the Hood, actually, I could say, was one of those moments where because it was really like, I was like, oh my God, that's Crenshaw Boulevard on screen. That's 57th Street on screen. I can't believe I'm seeing this. That really was a moment for me of feeling that. But I think in an even more significant way for me, the being seen was probably when I first started working and people were responding positively to my work, storyboarding on a professional level, and people going like, wow, this is really good. I really, people like actually seeing that I had something to offer. I mean, in a personal sense, for me, that was I feel seen, because my identity was really first and foremost as a creative person, a quote unquote artist. I kind of use that term, a little loosely when it comes to the stuff I've done, but still, as the way I really saw myself as a creative person when I finally started working professionally, and people responded positively to what I was doing, and regarded me as someone who, knew what he was doing. That was really what made me feel seen.
When did you feel all of these kind of responsibilities, or the way that people started to change the way that they see you?
Wow. Interesting question. I think the first time I'm sure it was at some time during the during the making of Rise of the Guardians, which was my first feature at DreamWorks Animation, that in the run-up of doing press for that and like starting to get interviewed and getting a little exposure, and because at the time I think that was the biggest animated film that had been directed by a Black person, biggest feature, studio feature that had been studio animated feature, and that kind of started becoming a little bit of a thing, and I started feeling like, oh wow, yeah, that's right. I've had my head buried in this project, multiple years, and I haven't really thought about it that way, but I guess it does have some kind of significance for, some people. So that was the first time I really kind of had to grapple with it. It was the first time I was being put out there to, help promote something. And, in this business, you as a personality are a lot of times are part of the promotion. And so that intensified, like, times 50 with Spider-Verse, because that was so much more, you were attached to something that everybody knew, Spider-Man. And it was kind of like first Black Spider-Man, Black director. So I think a lot of the spotlight kind of swung over to me, for better or worse. I mean, that was I think that was an easy sort of like two easy dots for people to connect. That guy must have thought up Miles Morales and Spider-Man and everything. And it's like, no, not really. I was part of the team. But it was kind of unavoidable that a lot of attention came my way because of that.
Well, you touched on a project that I would love to kind of dig into a little bit. The interesting thing for me is to understand, because we will all fail at some point, or quote unquote fail. What was that like for you, and how did you kind of get back on your feet, because and let me just say, I loved the Guardians, and you got shafted so bad by marketing, because like when I went to see the movie, I was like, this was the movie I would love to see. The movie and the commercials was the one I was like, oh, okay,
dude,
see it.
Oh, if only you knew how many of us who worked on that movie like sang that exact same song, and it was just like yeah, it was I think it was a transitional time for feature animation. It feels like we're still in that transition, but just that time, there was a time when just putting out an animated movie was like kind of promotion enough, and it's like, oh yeah, kids are going to go see it no matter what. Parents are going to bring their kids no matter what. And during the first wave of like, CG films, I mean, it wasn't that much of a problem, because I think people didn't really see other movies as competition to these big feature animated movies. And somewhere along the way that started to change. I think when people started getting used to there being, big feature animated movies, they stopped being as much of an event just being there, and people had gotten used to them. So by the time Guardians came along, the thing that we saw that that the I don't think the studio or the marketing people did was like, well, yeah, there's no other big feature, animated feature coming out around us. There's no Pixar, or I think Wreck-It Ralph had been out a few weeks before us. But other than that, they were like, oh, we're free and clear. The families are definitely going to come to see this, without reckoning that I think it was Skyfall and the newest Twilight movie were coming out like a week before us. And those things were just kicking ass at the box market, and everybody wanted to see them. So our real competition wasn't other animated movies. It was just movies. The world had kind of shifted a little bit. And then, as you say, they didn't really do any kind of a decent job of telling people what the movie actually was. So it was it's one of those, to have a big success with a movie, a lot of things have to go right. And if one of those things, if one or two of those things goes wrong, you can be in big trouble. And I think that's kind of what happened with us. It's like, okay, yeah, if the movie had been, a little bit better, maybe that would have, nudged the needle, but there's a lot of other factors too.
Yeah,
But
you got shafted. I can tell you that
well,
because the designs, everything, the story, I loved it all.
oh, thank you. Well, hey, I'll say that I think the thing that kept me from, like, jumping off a tall building back after the initial release of that was that I met lots of people even in the run up when we were doing our screenings before the release. We'd get great scores, and before the movie was finished, people would walk up to me and, people were crying in the theater and all this stuff. And, people telling you, thank you for giving my childhood back. And I mean, it sounds corny to say that, people actually said that, but they did. So it was like, I knew we had something. So even when it was like, you're seeing these like headlines, newest, animated flop and things like this. And you're like, oh my God, what, am I going crazy? Am I losing my mind? What's happening? But I always kind of knew, no, with that movie's, it's okay. The movie's okay. There's other stuff that went wrong, but you're not totally insane. You're not completely nuts. And I think that the fan base that the movie has had in the years since it came out, has kind of like proven to me at least that no, that was, it meant a lot to a lot of people. So,
but like our industry is full of extreme highs and extreme lows.
Oh yeah.
And I wonder about the pressure of being, the first Black director to direct an animated film and all the other stuff that's on your, on your back, family, whatever it must have been.
Yeah.
Could you kind of describe what you went through? Like,
I'll try, but it was a little surreal, to be honest with you. The other part of it, Bobby, you know how it is. You've got your head, your whole life gets taken over by these things when you're working on them. I mean, particularly, I guess, when you're directing one, it's like you don't have time for anything else for like, years on end. And coming out of it after you're done, it is like you've been in this alternate reality. So coming back to, your regular life or whatever you were doing before you started working on the movie it's just a weird experience, period. For that movie, Rise of the Guardians, I mean, people thought that was going to be a monster hit. I mean, all of the numbers and the test scores and from the previews and all of this stuff, people thought it was going to be like, oh man, this thing's going to like billions of dollars and this and that. But even then I was there just like, really? You really think so? Because, I was like, well, it's not, there's stuff that could be better in the movie. It's not but it was like, oh no, it's going to be this and that and blah, 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 blah. And then, it comes out and does like, it totally, does the opposite of what everybody's hoping it's going to do. And it's just surreal. I'm kind of like, I don't know, is this real? Is this a dream? Is this like, And so for me, it was hard. It was kind of unreal.
Did you think it was over at any point?
What's that?
Did you think it was over? Like, this is your big shot and you'll never get another?
There was probably a couple of days that I was like, wow, did the train just come and go? Did I miss the, but I never really felt like that. I don't think there was ever a day that I was like, it's all over. There was never a day
like you needed to like level up and really kind of fight to make sure that you stay in the game, kind of thing, compensating.
Yeah. I mean, I think over that next couple of years afterwards was all about that, and all about like, okay, you had this big shot, didn't quite go right, you I still have people telling me how great the movie is and how it, changed their life and did this and that and the other thing. Great. So I know we did something right, but it didn't all play out in the optimum way. But that's just the business. And I think for me, a big part of it was, separating the effect of separating the that effect that effect from what you actually did, if that makes any sense. I guess to be more clear about it, kind of realizing that you're more than the result of one thing that you've done. You're more than a failure or a success that you've had. You've got friends, you've got a family, you've got all this other stuff you've done in your life. You have a real life. It's not just this one event that actually defines you as a person. It, to some degree, it's going to define where you are, in your career at the time, but it doesn't define who you are. So, and I think when people get in trouble is when they over-identify with moments in their careers, with times that, really a lot of that stuff is based on luck. There's so much of any career, I think, that it could go either way at a lot of times, and sometimes you just get lucky, and it doesn't really mean that you as a person, as a creator, as an artist, whatever it is, were somehow totally responsible for that. And I think you have to be pretty clear-eyed about that. That you can't, you can beat yourself up over the stuff that you didn't get right. And believe me, I've done that a lot. But you also have to be, part of being realistic is also seeing where you didn't get it wrong, where it wasn't your fault, and not sort of not handcuffing yourself by blaming yourself for things that really aren't your fault. So I think it really does take taking a good hard look at the evidence that you actually have before you can say, okay, how do I move on from this? How do I, what do I do to pick myself up and dust myself off? What is it that got me there in the first place? Because, somebody thought you could do it, so you just have to remember that stuff and dig back in and decide whether you want to try again. And for me, it was sort of like, well, I'm not going to do anything else with my life. And I think a lot of that movie is pretty good. And I know a lot of people really got a lot out of it. So I'm just going to keep going. And it's just, it's a little bit of, you've got to be a little stubborn too, and believe in and believe in yourself and know that you've got more to give. But yeah, it does take, you have to be clear-eyed about that as well, that, the road back to something else, there's going to be some bumps, and there's going to be some other people that maybe don't see it quite the way that you do, but, you'll just have to work a little harder to get past that.
Seems like it's the common life's test that so many people that want to truly excel have to go through.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I always tell people ask me for advice, and I say, look, the first rule is just don't quit. Don't give up. If it's something that's really important to you, if you really, you say you love it and you really, really, excuse me, it really has meaning for you, don't give up, because you're going to hit obstacles. You're going to fail. Something's not going to go right, whether it's your fault or not. But if you quit, you will never know if you could have done it. It's as simple as that.
where do you kind of, or who do you kind of credit for that, this kind of thinking? Where did you develop it yourself? Did you read books, grandma, mom, dad?
Oh wow, let me see. Where did it come? Where I don't know. I honestly I think I've always been sort of just a kind of a little bit of a stubborn person in that way that I never I it probably comes probably from my mom and dad. Although, they weren't like, gigantic financial successes in life or anything. My dad was a mailman, mom was a teacher's aide, but they 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 did believe in trying hard. If you're going to try and do something, don't give up too easy. But I think it was something. I think it was something. Not to give myself too much credit, but I think it's something that I kind of came to in life. I think the most practical expression of it that I can clearly remember is when I was first learning to draw. And I remember there was one day I don't know, I was 6 or 7, something like that. And I was trying to draw a chair. And I couldn't get it right. I was actually looking at the chair and trying to draw it. I'm not sure what motivated me to do that because, that kind of primitive life drawing in a way. But I remember trying a few times and not being able to get it right. And then I remember telling myself, okay, I'm going to try to do it one more time. And if I don't get it right, then I'm just not going to draw anymore. I mean, it was like, I remember giving myself that, like, it's either do or die. If you mess up this chair this time, that's it. No more drawing for you. And I did it again and I got it right, or right enough for me at the time that I was like, hey, that looks pretty good. And I said, oh, I guess I'll keep on drawing. And that's from that point on, I was like, drawing was just, hey, that's one of my things. And I think that moment of going like, hey, I kept trying and gosh, it worked out. And I think, it's one of those, like, I think a lot of those lessons you learn in life, they kind of pass you by and you don't really understand what's happening. But I actually do think for me, that was a moment of, oh, I couldn't do it before. I tried. I thought about giving up, but I kept going. And guess what? I was able to do it. So on some level, I think that resonated with me.
Well, yeah, so many things that, everybody does in life. It's like
Right.
hindsight is 2020, right? And
That's
you do
right.
the thing at the moment, you don't know the importance of it
Mhm.
until much later.
Yeah.
Now, somebody is asking a question which kind of fits what we're currently talking about. Isoda says, to use Santa's words, what is your center in life or in work in case they're different?
Oh, wow. Good question. Wow. Got me. What is my center? I would probably say, what's my center? God, I don't know.
Or how do you get back to center?
Okay, my center. Probably the thing that really drew me into doing any kind of creative work, whether it was drawing or I guess it all kind of boils down to storytelling in a way for me. That was kind of what made me want to draw in the first place. And it was always, for me, I think it was always this feeling that I got when I was either reading a book or watching a movie or a TV show that I was really drawn into and reacted to emotionally. I would just get this really strong urge to be part of it and kind of live those emotions, and really, I would really, I'm one of those people, one of those kids, I would, watch a cartoon and that really got to me. And then I'd be like, trying to walk like the character. I'd try to talk like, I'd want to carry over that experience as much as I could and keep living, and without understanding exactly why it was affecting me, I would want to hold on to that feeling. And times 1,000 when I got to go to the movies, because when I was a kid, I didn't actually get to go to the movies all that much. So when I did get to go see something on the big screen, it was just like somebody shooting heroin like right into my brain or something, and it would make a huge impression. And I just I was always like, God, how could I hold on to that feeling or be part of that, or somehow have that experience of these gigantic oversized feelings on this dramatic scale. And so I'd go home, I'd try to draw it, I'd try to, if I was writing a story or something, I'd try to make the story feel like that. I'd try to, this was way before I ever had any inkling of being in the movie business, because I didn't even know that was possible. At the time, I thought movies were just, I didn't know who made them. I felt like I didn't know where they came from. The idea that somebody could actually make one was like almost impossible, because they just felt like so otherworldly and so like complete to me, that I was like, what do you mean somebody made it? It was just there. I don't it just, that barely computed with me when I was a kid. So I'd say that feeling of like wanting to create that kind of emotion, both for myself and for other people, was probably my center. Something about connecting with this bigger emotional power or resonance. Something about that. If it's not my center, it's pretty close to it.
When you start talking about the past there, I also started wondering, it's like you're coming from a place that others may feel like, oh, you were disadvantaged compared to where I grew up, things like that. And you didn't end up finishing college, right? University. Was there any kind of it's not imposter syndrome, it's not the word I'm looking for, but did you feel like any kind of inferiority complex, with that situation?
Sure. Yeah. But it was entirely self-imposed. I mean, I could have finished college. It was what I had chosen to study at the time, at the time I was in school. I didn't fully understand it enough. I went into UCLA as a fine arts major, and I was 17 when I started college, so I was still pretty young and pretty green, and I didn't really understand what art was beyond drawing really well. And that's what I thought I was going to be learning more of at UCLA, was drawing really well. And I hadn't really researched their arts program. The idea of like looking into it, for me at the time, my mom and dad hadn't been to college. I didn't know anybody who'd been to college, so I didn't have any. I just thought, oh, it says fine arts, that must be the place for me. I'm gonna do that. And I got there, and the first day of my first drawing class was the teacher said, oh, I decided to try something different this year. I'm going to teach this class, and we're going to do photograms. And I was like, wait a minute, what is that? And photograms are actually super cool. I learned what they were, and it's like you take a sheet of photographic paper and you arrange objects or things on them so that you can, when the light hits it, it's going to create an image, and you can do some really cool stuff. But at the time, I was like, I was drawing comic books. I wanted to be like a Frank Frazetta or something. I was like, what are you talking about? And it just threw me into this tailspin. And the whole program at the time at UCLA was all oriented around more conceptual and much more abstract art, and a sense of art that Later, I would learn about it and appreciate it way more. But when I was 17, I was like, what in the hell is this? I just had no frame of reference for it. And it
Well,
was,
I did a sour face because I was thinking that's so specific. You have
yeah.
to
Oh, yeah.
really want to do that. All of a sudden your choices, they're completely limited.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it depends on how you come to it, because I had another class. I remember, I think the next semester after that, or the next quarter after that, it was okay, figure drawing. Okay, finally, I'm gonna actually get some real like plain old figure drawing. And the teacher said, I'm gonna teach this class in collage this year. And I was like, what? And that was once again, I was just ready to jump out a window. But we started, and what that guy ended up teaching about form and shadow and light, that stuff that like I've held on to that ever since. So it's for me, it was a case of being open-minded enough to like to understand that art was more than I thought it was, more than my narrow, you know. But I think by kind of by that time the damage had been done, and I was like, my confidence in myself was shaken, because through high school and junior high I was the art guy, I was the drawing guy, I was the that was part of my identity. And suddenly I was like, oh, I don't know if this is my identity. I don't know if I am the art guy. I don't even know what art is anymore. Now, the other thing that was happening at the very same time was I was taking some English lit classes that were really cool. And I was getting way more into the idea of writing and narrative and telling stories. And under all that was me becoming more and more and more of a rabid movie fan, and starting to understand a little more about movies and being more drawn to them. And what I eventually, all this stuff kind of culminated in me realizing, I think the real reason I've been interested in drawing was more about telling stories through visuals. And I think the ultimate application of that is movies. And that's what everything was kind of driving me toward. And few years after I left college, I kind of like bummed around aimlessly and didn't really know what I was going to do. And then I had met some people kind of on the outskirts, a few friends of mine who had gotten little jobs in the outskirts of the movie industry. Like, a woman I worked with at a bookstore we worked at was kind of doing some part-time research assisting for a movie art director. And I was like, what is that? You can do that? Wow, you mean an art director working on an actual movie? And I met another couple of friends of mine were taking film classes at LA City College, and they were talking about it and talking about directors and cinematography, and it was like I was just now people listening now who haven't grown up in the digital age probably think I sound like an idiot for being, that far along and not understanding anything about movies. But back then it was a lot more mysterious. You didn't have as much information as you do now. And you couldn't go out and make a movie on your iPhone because there was no iPhone. A lot of things.
To find even books on the subject.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And there was no internet, so you couldn't look shit up on Google, that's for sure. So just getting these inklings that, wait a minute, you mean regular people can have something to do with making a movie? Regular people work on movies that I go and pay money to see, and all that stuff was just starting to come together in my brain. So a few years after I left college, it began to click for me, and I was like, I think that's what I want to do. I think what I actually really want to do is work in movies. I think what I actually want to do is be a director, because I want to be the guy who decides how to tell the stories. And that got me on this whole path.
So do you feel like it was a long journey?
Yes. Yeah, it was a really long journey, but I mean, it was a great journey. It's been like, yeah, it's been for me, it was a lot of kind of fumbling around, trying to find out how I could get closer to actually doing some of this. At the time, it was very expensive to make films. To make a film that looked like anything close to something professional was like tens of thousands of dollars, which I did not have. Well, so you would try to scrape together and do those things, but really, it was sort of like, well, how can I get a foothold in the industry so I can maybe learn on the job or like get some connections or at least be a part of it somehow. And that's how I stumbled into storyboarding. And that sort of became a way for me to get my foot in the door and to work with people that really knew their craft. And for me, a lot of storyboarding was like learning on the job. It really was. I mean, I was lucky that I had been drawing long enough with an eye toward maybe being a comic book artist or an illustrator. So I could do, I knew perspective, I could do figures, I could render space. I knew all the basics. All I had to do was learn film grammar and film technique. And I wanted to do that anyway. So I immersed myself in that and watched the movies and read as much as I could. I mean, I've just devoured any film book I could, any opportunity I had to learn. And then, got my first few. I had signed on with an agency that repped storyboard artists for commercials and did that for a year, through commercials, and actually working with directors for the first time. Learned a lot there. And at the end of that year, that's when I got my first gig on a feature, a movie, and working on that. And, I was surprised at how much of it kind of came naturally. I had taken in so many, thousands of movies by that point. I kind of, you sort of like, oh, I kind of, now that I've, it was almost like tasting food long enough, and what it's supposed to taste like when you make it yourself, and then it's just like getting better at actually crafting it and making it and learning more as you go. So yeah, and storyboarding like took me on this journey. Once I started working on movies, I got to work with a lot of my idols, people whose movies I had people I literally like worship as my hero.
Legends.
Yeah, absolute
Absolute
legends.
and legends.
Yeah.
And I would love to kind of like go into that a little bit, because do you get intimidated if you don't, or how do you deal with it? If you have any kind of intimidation at all, how do you kind of deal with it? Because obviously you're doing well with that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's no way you're not going to be intimidated, when you're like, what is it, like 26, 27 years old, and you're, Francis Coppola is like looking at your, storyboards and stuff, and you're like, oh my God, this guy's, yeah. I mean, even now I'd be intimidated by that. But I'll tell you, that was one gift that I got, being able to work in the business on that level at that time, was, when you're storyboarding, a lot of times you're one of the first people on the movie, and you get something which is pretty rare, which is just like one-on-one time with the director. And a lot of times you get to be there for big chunks of the process, and you see like, other people get hired. You're in on some of those meetings where who's gonna be in this movie, or who should we have for the production designer, or who should do the visual effects, to him or that. So you start seeing, how a lot of these decisions are made. It takes a lot of the mystery out of it, and then you also see these guys make mistakes.
Yeah,
you see Francis Coppola or Steven Spielberg or David Fincher, whoever. You see them make the wrong call, and they I'm sitting there at that time thinking like, oh my God, these guys, they know everything. They're never fazed by anything. Everything's always perfect. And nope. You see them all, all the time you would see like these guys, and I don't know what to do. I don't have an idea for this. I'm not sure. What do you think? I don't know. What do you think? Maybe this guy, where can we get, and you start realizing, oh, these are just people working it out. It's not like a magic wand. It's not like you get to a certain point and you don't have to figure anything else out, or you don't have to keep trying, or everything comes magically. It's a process every time. So being able to see that and realize that you don't necessarily, it's not about perfection the first time out, and it's not about instant results. You can make mistakes, you can make big mistakes, but if you can find a way to correct that and change course and get to something better, then you're going to be okay. So that whole part of my work education really really helped me to kind of relax and understand that yeah, you can do this. You can do this. It's not always going to go 100% right, but that's okay. You just have to accept that something's going to go wrong at some point, and if that doesn't freak you out too much and you can get on with it, you're going to be okay.
Now I've kind of thought about the two most common things that I feel make a really great director for live action anyways. One is being able to deal with a giant issue and figuring it out quickly, whether it's a production designer or director. And the other is the ability to make a movie while defending your movie from all these executives or whoever else, needs to kind of be in that room. Do you have, when I say that, are there any really good, strong examples that you can think of that either you were directly a part of or that you witnessed?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure. There's like, I think one of the primary jobs when you're a director or, producers too, working on a movie is like, you have to have a vision for the project. You have to know what it is you're trying to do when you're making a movie. That is, you have to have a creative target and saying this movie is it's the vibe of the movie, the feeling of the movie, what you're really trying to say with the movie thematically, artistically. You have to have a firm idea, a clear idea of what it is you're trying to do, because you are going to get pushback from people who don't understand one aspect or another. And if you can't clearly articulate what it is you're trying to do, and you can't tell them why their solution isn't going to work for this in a compelling and clear way, then you're going to run into a lot of trouble, because there's a lot of people who will have alternate ideas or other interpretations, or that there's going to be you need a clear star to steer by, or else you're just going to end up wandering off into the fog. So having a creative vision that's clear enough and understandable enough that you can argue for it and really guide yourself by it is one of the most important things. And you have to be able to articulate that to the whole crew, that so that everybody understands the mark that you're trying to hit. I mean, with something like Spider-Verse, we had such a clear goal from the very beginning on that movie. Not that we got a lot of pushback from the studio, because remarkably on that movie there wasn't. And I think that's because Phil and Chris had already had such a strong reputation going into that movie. But the creative vision for that, which was to make a movie that drew on the aesthetics and the tone of comic books, to kind of tell a really emotional and heartfelt story about this kid who was going to take on the legacy of Spider-Man. it was something that we could always look at the very first sort of, treatment Phil wrote, and the very first discussions that we had about tone and ambitions and all of that, and it stayed, even though the movie changed a lot on the way there, stayed the same consistently. So you have to be able to have something that you're that confident in and clear about, so that you can kind of like fend people off while you're in the midst of trying to pull it off.
I gotta admit, when I first heard about Spider-Verse,
Mm-hmm.
this is like, it wasn't too long ago that there was the Spider-Man live action version.
Yes, it was in the works at the same
Oh,
time.
okay. It was in the works, highly anticipated. And then Sony says, we're going to do another Spider-Man.
Yep.
Obviously, I was very wrong by just kind of seeing the headlines at first and go, pass, right?
Same thing I thought. I'll be honest with you. When I first heard about it, I was like, really? Another one? Okay, whatever.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. So you did you weren't that interested in the beginning.
Well, it was a really funny story because what happened, at least the way I remember it, and it makes me laugh. I had just signed on to direct another animated movie that Avi Arad, who was actually one of the producers on the live action Spider-Man movies and was a producer on Spider-Verse. Avi was, really connected to the Marvel movies and to the Sony Marvel movies especially. And I think in the first couple of weeks around the office, I started hearing people talking about Spider-Man. And I go, oh, hey, Avi, what's going on? Are you guys doing another Spider-Man? Because, the last Andrew Garfield movie had just come out not too long before. And he said, oh, yeah, we're going to do an animated Spider-Man at Sony. And I went, oh, okay, cool, whatever. I was kind of like, well, yeah, there's a lot of Spider-Man stuff out there, but whatever. I guess that could be okay. And then he said, yeah, Chris Miller and Phil Lord are going to produce it. And I went, oh, really? Now that sounds kind of interesting. And then he goes, yeah, your name was on the list to direct, but I told him you already got a job. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Mm-mm. But, fast forward, like 8-9 months after that, the movie that I'm directing falls apart. I get a call from my buddy Bob Persichetti, who by that time is directing on Spider-Verse. And he goes, hey, I hear you got some time on your hands. Why don't you come over and storyboard for a bit on do some story on the Spider-Man movie? I think you'll really enjoy it. And I was like, oh, okay, great. And so I go over, and that's when I really get my first look at some of the very earliest viz dev art that Alberto Mielgo had done. And I was totally blown away. And then I see the little treatment that Phil had written up. And it was super different from the movie that, eventually got made, but the spirit of it was there. And I was like, oh man, this is really going to be something. And I spent 9 or 10 months boarding with Bob. And by the end of that, they were realizing, with the schedule and the size of this thing, we're going to need more than one director. And they asked me to come on and co-direct with Bob. So I ended up on Spider-Verse.
No, as you're saying that, I'm like thinking back to when you're saying, I've been a lucky guy. And
it's true. Oh man.
Hey, I'm not doubting that, but I do kind of feel like luck is generated for the people that are truly, truly lucky.
Mm-hmm.
If you think back, like whether it's on purpose or not, what are kind of like the things or the traits or whatever that you think has generated a lot of luck for you?
Oh God, honestly, I think it goes back to probably just not saying, forget it, I quit. Because after Guardians, I had been so demoralized that I was like, I worked myself to death for 3 years. All of us who worked on the movie, we we like gave it all we had, and like it comes out and it's it's nobody even knows it's there, and it's a flop and blah, 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 blah. Forget it. I'm not doing this again. Life's too short. I could have done that, and like it would have been totally understandable to a degree. But for whatever reasons, I didn't, And if I had said, forget it, no more animated movies for me, I'm going back to storyboarding and live action, the hell with this stuff. But if I had done that, I would never have had the opportunity to work on Spider-Verse, which turned out to be, 100% the opposite of the Guardians experience after the movie came out. So it's like, I think, honestly, I do think a lot of it is just like, just hang on. It's like you're climbing a mountain. The wind's blowing hard and it's trying to blow you off the side of the mountain, and you just hold on and let the wind blow you off.
I feel like a lot of times the bad luck is kind of like life's test to say, like, you're almost there, so I'm going to throw this cow patty in your face and see how you feel with that.
There's something to that, because I mean, I can't say it often enough. The people who do quit are never gonna know what was around that next corner. You're never gonna know. If you stop trying, you're never gonna know what good luck you could have had the next day. So, I mean, and I as I say it, I realize it's also a possible recipe for delusion. So I would say that the thing that you need to have along with that mindset is just, you have to be honest with yourself as much as you can about, your abilities, about where you are in the present moment, about, what your potential is, about what the realities of your environment are, whether it's the job market or your personal life, whatever it is. You can't try not to fool yourself. Take a good hard look at what you actually have to work with, where you actually are, what you actually want. And just you have to if those things aren't lining up, then you have to change something so that they do. You have to be in a place where you can actually get to whatever your ambition is. There has to be a possibility somehow of getting there from where you are. If not, you've got to change something about where you are, or you've got to admit that, I think my goal is not the right one. There's something else that would make me happy and fulfilled, and there's something I'm not being realistic about, or something that I'm being misled about that's making me believe that's the place for me, when in reality I actually think I'd be happier and more fulfilled there if I would just let go of this illusion that I have about this other thing.
So that's an amazing answer, and all these answers are wonderful. I see a lot of really great comments about this conversation. And as people that work in stories, of course, we can't help but to spin up some stories, almost like reflex. And seeing your trajectory, it's like, for me, I see this person wanting to direct, getting into movies, getting onto not just one, but many, what is it called again? Second
units.
Second unit stuff, directing, and then perhaps thinking, I don't know, this is where I'm making shit up, right? But like just thinking, are they not going to give me a chance here? Screw it. I'm going to go to animation. And then now you're coming back to live action.
Right.
That's, of course, totally fictional, made up in my head.
No, you're not that far off the mark. I mean, but there was definitely some of that, like, hey, I'm right here. When do I get my shot? But when I was in live action and doing those second units, part of what was going on was me not. Some of that came out of. Okay, that's like when I was just talking a minute ago about like having to look at where you are and where you want to get to, and does all that stuff line up? And a little bit of my logic was off back then because I was thinking, okay, you start climbing the ladder and somebody's going to see you and go, oh, what a, talented, nice guy that is. Let's give him a shot because he got an A on his report card and here you go. Here's a movie. And to some extent, that was some of my thinking back then. Not that I wasn't trying on my own to kind of I was also writing at the time and trying to get people to look at my scripts, but I didn't understand the extent to which, if you want to be a director in this business, it's really competitive. There's a lot of people that really want to do it. So you really have to push. And part of the job is getting the job, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
You really do, to an extent, have to declare yourself as a director and make other people see it and believe it and make yourself believe it. And it's a hard thing to do, to get up that much self-belief. A guy like John Singleton, that dude had it when he was in his early 20s. He was 1,000% positive and focused. That's what he was going to do. And he did it. To an extent, you need some of that. And I didn't understand. I was sort of well, I'm so talented. People can see it, can't they? They're going to just say, look at that guy. We want him. And it's a little bit of that happens, but really, for that job, you kind of need to do it yourself. You kind of need to barge in and do it, and I mean, the clearest way to do it is to make a really great little film, even if it's not, that polished, but people can see the promise in something. I and I've said earlier back then, making something like that was beyond my means financially. If it was today and I had iPhones and I had Final Cut on my computer and all that stuff, you could make The Godfather now, without, studio backing practically. But if I'd had all this stuff back then, I think it would have been a different story for me, honestly. But yeah. So I wasn't being totally. I didn't quite understand at the time, I think, what it took to really be a director or do what I wanted to do. I was really thinking of it in terms of an award somebody would give you rather than something you've got to go out and grab it yourself, to the extent that I now understand that you do. So that's the one part of the story that I'd say, well, it's maybe I did feel like that sometimes, but here's what was really going on. The other thing for me was, by that time I had a family, I had a wife, I had kids, God, we got to get a house. I got to pay rent. I got to do this, got to do that. So you do get into this thing of wow, now I've got to work I'm in this industry working, and now I'm making my living at it. So that is going to put some limits onto what I can do that's going to take time away from me just earning a living. And it becomes a lot easier to sit there as a storyboard artist and you're getting your reliable checks and everybody likes you as a storyboard artist and you're always going to have work. And suddenly, well, it's a little harder, go off and try to take, 5 or 6 months to go and make a short film and, say, honey, I know we were saving that $10,000 to put down on a house, but I got to rent these cameras and blah, blah, blah. I actually did that once and my wife didn't murder me. So, but, I could only do it that once. So there's a lot of variables that you kind of have to navigate and deal with. But all that to say, yeah, you were pretty much on the money with your fictional story of me.
Well, hey, it's all going to plan. So
yeah, but I will say the way that I got into animation though that was also much more by chance. I directed second unit on a movie called Tank Girl. And the guy who produced that was a guy named Aaron Warner. You know Aaron, don't you, Bobby?
Yeah, I produced Shrek.
There you go.
I worked on something with him on the Trolls before it was called Trolls.
A couple of years after Tank Girl, I think it was, I got a call from Aaron, and he was doing the first Shrek. And he called up and asked me if I'd be, hey, you ever worked in animation? Would you be interested? I'm doing this thing. It's pretty cool. We're using computer graphics and this, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, sounds good. But I think I was storyboarding like Fight Club at the time.
Yeah.
My attitude was like, yeah, animation's really cool. Love Pinocchio, this, that, the other thing. I wasn't a big animation guy, fan of animation, but, it wasn't my first thing. I was like, yeah, but, I'm doing a real movie, so, nice to hear from you and blah, blah, blah. Fast forward like 2-3 years later, CG animation has kind of exploded. So you've had Toy Story, you've had the birth of Pixar, you've had, Shrek 1 and 2 come out, and they're really, really good movies, winning Academy Awards, and really great. And it's like, wow, it's really this new CG, and it's really a thing. It's really something else. And it's got a little more of a live action thing. And I was like, it's really interesting. And Aaron called back and said, hey, we're prepping Shrek 3. Why don't you come over to DreamWorks and check this out? I still think you might be a good fit for this. So by that time I was like, wow, I really am kind of intrigued by this. I went to the DreamWorks campus in Glendale, and it was this beautiful place that was it was like a really nice college campus, DreamWorks, I remember. It's got a fountain, and I'm walking around, and I'm looking at the artists working in these beautiful offices, and there's art on the walls, and I'm like, wow, when I'm doing storyboards and live action, they shove you in some little shitty closet or a trailer that's like nobody cares, it's like, but here it's like there's practically people fanning you with fans, and everybody's so nice, and it's all about the art, all about the artists. And so yeah, I'll check this out for a little bit. I'll take a look. And with the thought that, I'll be there 6 months like most storyboard gigs, and I'll say, okay, well, nice, but not for me, and take back off. But I really got sucked into it, and realizing that the animation story process is really different than the live action storyboarding process. It's a whole different craft, and kind of learning that, and getting this taste of a different storytelling medium. And I got kind of seduced by it, and I ended up hanging around DreamWorks for years. And they would start offering me things. And I also had the luxury at DreamWorks of coming in as I was the guy from live action, So I had a little bit of the carpet kind of got rolled out for me in a way that I think is pretty different from most people breaking into animation. But I sort of had
expecting big things from you.
Yeah, I had an easy, and they were kind of like, they put me on a directing track fairly early, because I think Aaron had said, this guy could do it, So I had sort of a rose-colored glasses view of the animation industry, but that's how it rolled out for me.
Fantastic. Well, there are some questions I'd love to go over.
Yes.
This one pertains to exactly what we're talking about here, live action and animation. So Shivi asks, hello, Peter. What are the different and unique things you enjoyed about working on live action and animation projects? Things that you maybe missed about live action when working on animation, and the things that you loved while working on a film like Spider-Verse.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, the big difference between those two, it also has to do with where I was in live action too, as a storyboard artist. As a storyboard artist in live action, you are helping the director figure out how he's going to shoot the movie, generally. So it's less about, it has to do with storytelling and making narrative choices and things like that. But it's less about the writing process than a story artist in animation is involved with. In
positioning cameras and things like that.
Yeah. But live action is much more about that. It's a little more technical. It's a little more and it's a little more diagrammatic in a way. Like, you're not, when you're doing live action storyboards, you're not concerned with necessarily with the emotional flow of what's going on any more than you have to be to kind of say, we're going to be here, and then you're going to pan over here and push into a close-up on him. And it's really much more about that in live action storyboarding, as opposed to an animation story artist. Sometimes, you know, at DreamWorks, I would just get a little outline of a scene, and they would go like, okay, you know, draw this out, and we're going to cut it together into an animatic, and let's see how it plays. And my first few attempts, it was like very stiff and sort of like, you know, and I didn't understand that, oh, you actually have to craft the emotional performance of the characters in the storyboards. You're telling the emotional story with acting and everything in animation. You're like, because people are going to watch it edited together. That's something you just don't have, or you didn't have in live action.
Totally, the actors' jobs. No?
Exactly. It was two totally different ways of using drawing in a narrative sense when it came to filmmaking. So that was a big learning curve, and it's something that I really grew to love about animation. Was the role of the story artist in that was way more fulfilling, because when I was storyboarding in you know, in live action, you know, like I said, I really wanted to direct, and part of that for me was writing. I was doing a lot of writing on the side. I've got my drawer full of unmade scripts, you know, just like any writer. But as a storyboard artist, you know, you can contribute ideas and like pitch ways for shooting something, or, you know, and your knowledge of story comes in really handy. You know, directors in live action, whether they know it or not, truly appreciate that when they find it in a storyboard artist, somebody who has an appreciation of story and knows how to communicate the appropriate dramatic, you know, the appropriate way to shoot something or frame something to convey in story terms the importance of that moment. But it was something that I always craved more of, to show like, well, I can do more than just, you know, draw what the director wants. When I got into animation, that muscle got a lot more work, and you become, you know, an animation story artist really can contribute to the writing of an animated movie in a big way. So that was super fulfilling for me, and really helped me learn to see movies in a much more holistic sense, I think, than I had before, and really taught me a lot about narrative storytelling, taught me a lot about performance. So there was a lot of things in my specific journey in animation that really fed a lot of what I had been hungry for in live action. And I think the thing, you know, one of the things in live action that I kind of missed was sort of the pace, and sort of the, you know, animation is long and drawn out, and there's a lot of time in all the iterations and exploration that you have time to do when you're putting together, you know, different cuts of the movie. You can kind of like go off and wander off down different paths just because you can. In live action, you tend to stay much more focused, and you've got an idea. And once things get to a certain point, you know, it becomes about, okay, how do we make this work? How do we take this idea that we agreed on and like just dig into that and like, you know, take that and run with it. And that feeling of taking things and run with it is something that I kind of missed in animation. The both of those modes of storytelling between live action and animation, I think having a foot in both of those has helped me have a broader, deeper understanding for myself of what the process can be. But yeah, it's hard to choose which one I like better. There's things I love about them both.
Omni director. You just need a Broadway show, and I think you got them all.
Yeah, right.
So Brenda Ray asks, who were your mentors? How did you handle their criticism?
Oh man, my mentors. I have yeah, I've had I always tell people, I kind of, I sort of tended to adopt mentors, and I think a lot of people were mentoring me probably without their even knowing it. I was just sitting there like being a sponge, really soaking things up. A lot of times people who had less experience than me, I consider, you know, I still learned tons from them. And they mentored me in ways that they don't even know. But like, boy, people are really like formative mentors. I'd say when I got to work with Francis Coppola on Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, he'd been one of my idol. I mean, that guy was like, still is like a god to me. Like, I look at his movies. Look at The Godfather. I mean, it's
Changed
like,
everything. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's how can I even be in the same room with this guy? And yet, he was very warm and welcoming, and a real artist who had a real regard for creative people, regardless of how much experience they had. But if he saw that you could make an actual contribution, he was like embracing you with open arms. And I got to work on that movie for a year, and he pretty early on, he kind of like realized, I had a passion to do this, and he took me seriously as, this kid who wanted to be a director someday. And he was really like, you know, kind of took me under his wing a bit, and it was incredible.
How old
So I
were you?
really feel, yeah. So that was one of those cases where like, yeah, I've clearly felt mentored by him, and took a lot of the lessons that I learned in working with him to heart. I say John Singleton, I'd say, ended up being kind of a mentor, even though John's like, he was like several years younger than me, and but just watching him do it, and the way he like that self-belief, and the way he like kind of like forged his way through it, and it was like, wow, I learned a ton from that guy. um David Fincher, learned a ton from David Fincher. Ron Howard, I worked on a couple of movies from Ron Howard. Learned, it's you get mentors from all over the place. In animation, I'd say Aaron Warner was one of my was a formative influence when it came to thinking about animation and understanding that. um you know Bob Persichetti, who I knew at DreamWorks, a lot of story artists, Conrad Vernon, any number of guys, Reg Bordage. There were Rob Porter, my good buddy Rob Porter. These brilliant story artists who I had really like helped me learn something about that craft. And it's like those guys. You watch them give a pitch, back in the old days of DreamWorks, and you're on the floor laughing, and you're getting story, and you're seeing them craft scenes, and it taught me tons and tons about storytelling. So there's, you name it. I mean, I think mentor, it's not necessarily about somebody who's like taking you by the hand and showing you things. It's anybody you're learning anything from, really, on a consistent basis, that you kind of can open yourself up to, and let yourself learn from them. To me, that's how I kind of tend to look at mentorship.
And earlier you were saying when you were working on Dracula, you were like 26 or something?
Yeah, 26, 27, I think.
Amazing.
I
Amazing.
think. Nah, but 27, yeah, that sounds about right.
Jeez.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this question comes from Jeremy, and he says, Hi, Peter. As a mixed race Latino, I love your quote in The Art of Spider-Verse where you said, there's a scarcity of non-white heroes as lead characters on page 26. Do you feel bringing this story to life makes you also feel a little bit like a hero to underrepresented groups? I love the art style of the movie, one of my favorites. Thanks for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure, man. I I don't know if I feel like a hero. If anything, I feel like somebody who happened to be at the right place at the right time. You know, it's like it yeah, it's no, you know, yeah, being there on Spider-Verse and being able to tell that particular story at that particular time was definitely like scratching an itch that, you know, I'd had for a lot of my life, which was to see, you know, see that kind of uh story that I would have killed to see something like that when I was, or actually, I'll put it this way. I didn't even know I was missing that as a kid, you know, because I'd
Hmm.
seen, you know, you'd seen hundreds of movies and hundreds of stories about young heroes who go against the odds and have to become the person they're going to be in order to save the day and blah, 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 and go on this epic adventure and they're the chosen one and whatever, whatever, whatever. And, you know, everybody loves those kinds of stories, no matter who's in them. I mean, you know, anybody of any race can love Lord of the Rings or, you know, you name it, Star Wars. But working on being able to work on Spider-Verse and, you know, tell that story through Miles was like, really, I could feel the 12-year-old in me kind of going like, that's not right yet. And we don't know how we're going to do that. And that's not working and blah, 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 blah. So you're really just trying to tell a good story. And you're really just trying to like, you know, you work on these things long enough and the characters become real to you in a way. And you feel kind of a sense of responsibility toward them. And you want, you know, we all really, all of us, no matter what race or whatever we were on Spider-Verse, we all just fell in love with Miles and we were like, we gotta like give this guy his day in the sun. You know, we really want to do right by him and tell his story in a way that's going to make people see who he is and love him. And that's honest to God, that's what we all felt working on that movie. And I think that is where uh, that is where Miles gets his specialness from and his authenticity and his whatever it is about him that connects to people. It's because the people who were working on that movie really cared about making him shine in that way. We all wanted him to feel that real, mostly because, you know, at the time we were like, wow, we really have to get people to buy him as a new Spider-Man because he's the only other one since Peter Parker. But along with that came, we want people to see this young Afro-Latino kid and really feel him emotionally and go on this crazy journey with him and never lose sight of what he's about or what he's feeling, to make him as real as possible. And that one idea really drove everything else about the movie, about the detail that we were going to design New York in, about how the comic book language was going to serve his emotional journey. Everything about it came from wanting people to be on the emotional journey with Miles.
Wonderful. Well, I want to make sure I respect your time. I just got one last question for you.
Mm.
And this one might be the toughest to answer, you know, because
Uh-oh.
you've had an incredible journey, ups and downs, a whole lot of ups, which I'm so glad to see, you know, people
Woo,
that
me too.
deserve it, getting those, you know, those shots, those accolades. So my question is, you know, rubbing shoulders with legends, myths.
Mm.
If you had to thank somebody from your past that did something for you or taught you something that was just extra special, who
Mm.
would you want to thank from your past and what did they do?
You know, I would probably have to thank my mom and dad. It probably sounds corny, but just thinking of how I grew up and how sort of um uh I don't know if it was unlikely or, yeah, I can't really say that. I don't know everybody else's life. But, you know, I think I mentioned earlier, you know, my dad was a mailman. We had a lot of music at home, and a lot of like he was really into classical music and jazz music. So to this day, I think there was something about the emotional impact and romanticism of a lot of the music we were exposed to early on as kids that like I don't know. I think something of that like helped form some sort of picture of the world, or it opened up something in us, I think, in me. Total ordinary regular person. But it was really important to her that we have books at home, and that that she got us reading early. So I was reading at a pretty early age, and she made sure, she would take us to the library, we'd check out books. We had encyclopedias at home that I devoured, and there was always for her, the idea of education and learning, and I think being intellectually curious was really important, even if she couldn't have completely articulated that herself at the time. She knew it was somehow, and she wanted that for us. So between the two of them, I really feel like I got the real building blocks of wanting to use my brain to connect with things in the world, and with abstract concepts, and with being sort of intellectually open about stuff in a way that would lead me to things like literature and movies and books, and stuff that I found myself surrounded by as a kid, never understanding or knowing that someday I could actually do that stuff, but it was all there. So I think the intellectual life that my mom and dad inadvertently made for me, like, was a huge gift. So I always have to thank them for that.
Anybody could have kids, but parenting is difficult.
You got that right. Whew.
So I want to thank you, Peter. This has been wonderful.
My pleasure.
A little chance to talk and annecy and everything, but not like this. I got to ask pretty much every question I want to ask. I look forward to everything that you do. It's all exciting. It's all very exciting. So I wish you very much the best, and can't wait to see you at Lightbox.
Thanks so much, Bobby. This has been great. Thank you. Appreciate it, man. And thanks everybody for the questions and for bothering to check this out.
Fantastic. All right, Peter. So again, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Bobby.
Take care, everybody.
Good talking to you.
Bye.